hopefully when you take us to your cities, you can take a step back and consider these things. So the first one is never stop organizing. From the day that that passed in city council to the day that we found out it was going to be on the ballot, that could have all been spent time educating the public about what it means to be transgender, talking about this bathroom myth, or as I like to call it, bathroom bullshit, and really facing it head on. So definitely never stop organizing. Always keep in touch with your community members and your allies and have them mobilize towards change, even when you think you've won. The next thing is that public education is step one. So you always want to do a temperature check before you do an NDO campaign in your city, as Ian was describing. So, sort of think, is there a highly organized opposition like the Houston Pastors Council? Is there a lot of money in the opposition? Are there a lot of people who are well informed about transgender issues? Do we have enough nonprofits that would be willing to join a coalition? So do that temperature check, think about public education before you jump in, and attack the bathroom bullshit head on. It's really important to not shy away from this, because the opposition has realized that they can win on this malicious lie, no men in women's bathrooms. They now know that they can win on this. So it's really, really important that you face that head on and call it out for what it is. It's transphobic, it's hateful, and it's misguided and untrue. Because they will tell those malicious lies, and that's our transgender friends and family members who are the target of those lies. So we can't shy away from that. We have to confront it head on. Also, you want to reflect your city's diversity in a campaign. So if you're thinking about starting an NDO campaign, take a step back and think about who you're going to invite to be a part of a very inclusive coalition. So you want to make sure you have groups like the local chapter of Black Lives Matter and the Dreamers there, because non-discrimination ordinances also affect them, and so they should have a say in this campaign as well. And make sure that everyone has an equal voice at that table. That's super, super important. Yeah. Oh yeah, and hire people of color and transgender people in leadership positions on your campaign. Transgender people are the experts of their own experiences, and they can tell people better than anyone else that this bathroom thing is a myth. Right, so we wanted to do an activity to talk about, taking this home to your cities. So we didn't know that this was going to be a lecture style room, and we were thinking about breaking into 4 small groups in each corner of the room. It's going to be a little difficult, but it's kind of the only option. We can sort of gather around each corner and stand, and people can spread out a little and sit. But so we'll try to split it into 4 corners, but people don't have to move too far. And we're going to be discussing this question: what groundwork needs to be laid before moving forward with a non-discrimination ordinance campaign? So we've told you some of the lessons that we've learned, and for all of those folks who raised your hand when I asked who's volunteered or worked on a campaign before, this is your chance to share what lessons you've learned. It's also for folks who've never worked on a campaign before and are thinking about it, to share the unique context in their city. Every city is different, and it's going to have a unique context that you need to consider before going forward with an NDO campaign. So this is sort of our chance to work through that preemptively. And I know as an organizer, I often forget to ask this question. I just want to jump right in and tackle it, but this is really the most important part. So we're going to break into those 4 groups, and one of each of us will be the note taker for those groups, and we're just going to work through this question.
When do we get to ask questions?
Oh, there's going to be Q&A at the end, but you can raise your hand at any point and ask questions.
What is the deal about, is it sex phobic? Because we had the ERA and the same issue about bathrooms came up. We had the military issue and everybody was freaking out about gay men in the bathroom. And so here we are back in the bathroom. What's the deal?
We were actually joking about this on the way here from Texas. We were thinking, it's honestly creepy that they focus so much on bathrooms. It's like, what are they doing in bathrooms that they're so worried about what we're doing? But I think it's just an unfortunate, misguided, irrational fear that's based in homophobia and transphobia. And I think we really have to introduce the rest of the world to our community before that fear is going to be dispelled. So are we ready to talk about this question in small groups? Okay, thanks.
We did the first big event was the public call.
Yeah, we're all the same
Thinking about doing this downtown.
and collect signatures on.
I would hope to.
Petition.
Okay, so we have a diversity resolution. There's everybody at first was like, yes, we have a non-discrimination ordinance, but it's not.
What's the difference?
The difference is it's people. Basically, when say, oh, we value diversity, and here's a long laundry list of people we value that with buzzwords, not actual like law.
Presented to city commissions. Now, that increases I guess our public education part, the city commission still they're still informed.
I would like to say, okay, we have this positive statement. How do we change that statement to actual action?
Other things that
kind of like throw stuff out here. I think that's a good place to start. Like, how would you, if you're going to issue like a diversity resolution, how do you translate something that's non-binding into legislation that measures and keeping in mind what your legislative system looks like locally? Because I don't know. I barely know what Houston looks like. That's not true, but still. You're thinking something.
Brad, I just, you talked about your mayor, and I think that that's pretty critical. You waited, I don't know if you waited to the third term, or she waited for a third term.
We tried in the second term, but we got shot down by supporters saying that you will prevent her from being elected to another term. To try to so our community made a calculated decision to say, let's step back and do it a third time.
Yeah, and I think to me that's the critical part is your advocates that are already in city council or mayor or whatever, and who you're electing to be there.
So we would say, basically, firm up our relationships with the advocates that we know are on our side locally, and maybe elect new ones.
She started to walk in the door where he had just come out, and I said, no, that's
People can just call stuff out. Come on.
You can't go in there. And he made just some offhanded remark of how, well, you never know what and I mean, it was just very obvious.
I don't like how everybody is so quiet.
I don't know what to call out.
Well, I mean, if you think about like what steps, and you can look at some of the other fights that happen across the country. I mean, we know what our opponents are going to throw at us. What type of ground work together to not rely on somebody when they come in with. There's still no real answer to how to defeat them out.
I guess those support about those communities that are going to have a stake in this issue that we want to see, that will be able to kind of reach out to the state.
Wow, yeah. There's a lot of opposition in North Carolina. There's a lot of people who
And a lot of it seems to be underground, but it's
it's high up and well funded.
The fact that there's about 20,000 college students, but only about maybe like 5,000 locals. So the fact that there's like 5 times as many college students as there are like
make sure that when the ordinance comes up, it's
Yeah,
first
because college students are most of the registered stations.
Yeah.
so often it's like,
I'm pretty sure
this
that's the
coalition
reason
was
Watauga
this
County
high,
has
it's like,
70%
we've got other
county
stuff going
votes.
on, we're next to each other for years.
Oh, okay, so just
and we register.
Yeah, well, that's good. Okay, so that's a plus. That's a good plus.
Near Alabama. And like the closest big city is like Hattiesburg, where and that so a lot of people like how Hattiesburg kind of like a big gay place. I mean, there's a lot more diversity there, but it's not. Calling it diversity kind of feels like saying it's LGBT accepting is like a stretch. There are gay people there, sure, but stretch. And like, if we had like introduced that at Waynesboro, I guarantee you, like people wouldn't even, they would probably say like gay people don't even exist in Waynesboro. They would say something like that, even though we're there.
So that plays to the visibility thing. Making sure that the community is benefiting from it as visible as possible.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are just scared, like would be scared to do that, like
And Brad, there was another thing you talked about, which was how the mayor sets the agenda where you are, and so how you even get it to be heard,
on the polling thing, we actually
kind of setting up a system to hold that mayor accountable to the plan, like not letting them just like get away with just saying it, but putting forth a plan to hold them accountable to. I'm sorry, just putting forth a plan to hold that mayor or elected official accountable to the, not just saying it, but actually putting it into action.
I was thinking where we are, it would be valuable to get
initially
some of the mainstream religious denomination leaders on board. But back in 2012, when North Carolina was passing anti-marriage amendment, we could not get them to come forward. I mean, they supported us, but they just would not want to say it. No, would not.
We've had our lots of sympathetic clergy, but we don't want to cause division within our congregations or what have you. So we'll step back on this.
Well, and sometimes even if, like, we had a really big problem with getting mainstream denominations. We had, First Universal Unitarian, lots of those. And when we would have, like, press conferences and you want the optics to be a certain way, when we had 25, pastors who were all white and wearing, like, rainbow, vestments on them, it didn't really reinforce the message that this is something that's being supported by, like, everyday people. So yeah, I think that's a big challenge is to get mainstream religious organizations or religious leaders involved, or leverage relationships with the mainstream ones to at least keep them out of fight. Sometimes if they won't let petitions get collected in the church, that's a win. And they may not come out in favor of what we're just working on, but we may be able to stop them from organizing against it in some way. And I think in Oregon, when they were doing the marriage, they were fighting for marriage equality. The first time around, they had churches collect petitions. During the time between that fight and the next fight, they did a lot of really intentional work with mainstream, like churches and ones that were collecting petition signatures the first time. And the next time around, some of those churches dropped out and said, we're not going to support it, but we're not going to let people collect petitions. So maybe figuring out how we not just recruit them, but maybe even keeping them out of the fight can be
It's a continuation of.
So doesn't that affect their tax exempt status if they collect petitions? Is it becoming too politically involved?
Well, it's
This is kind of an interesting way to think and go about it, but because I was thinking that because they usually have like city hall meetings and stuff in public forums, get as many progressive people as you can in there to have their voices heard.
Yeah, I thought you were right. Because a lot of times those aren't.
But what we can then do
That's a big one. That's honestly how in Houston the fight started, is people were just going and being like, we just noticed this wasn't on the books, and then eventually So what are other, let's see, electing progressive local leaders, so what's something you could do in advance before an NGO campaign to make sure there's progressive local leaders? What?
Vote them out.
Vote them out? Maybe register youth also?
Lay the groundwork.
Right.
I'm not sure how I word that suggestion.
Well, you have to find leaders who are effective. Could be somebody in PTA or to get them into moving them up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Convince people to actually run.
Yeah.
Yes. Convincing good people to run. The League of Women Voters has a workshop in Houston that trains progressive women to run.
We have that.
That's awesome.
Well, I think part of the Charlotte conversation is have the power to change the city council.
To get to like that office. So it's why you're going to run for public office. Awesome. That's
County or Western North Carolina, Ashland's very liberal. Jasmine, who is a United Church of Christ minister, a lot of times that first step, if the first ask is, can you support us on this thing? And it's way too big of an ask, right? And just by asking for too much right off the bat, you're short-circuiting things. And a lot of times, especially with conservative religious clergy, the first ask needs to be, can we have a private conversation? And maybe that's as far as you're gonna get, but a lot of, and Jasmine has done that a lot, where that's the extent of the relationship, where very conservative clergy, you know, they have their biblical stance, they have their personal stance, etc. But there's also 3 or 7% that says they know they have LGBT youth in the pews, right? And so there's some human or some clergy level that says, even if it's just a dialogue, and you're never, ever, ever going to get to the point where that pastor is going to support something publicly, or at least not in this election cycle or for a campaign in the next year. But just, you know, building, I think, to the other point from Ian, often we have political campaigns or ballot campaigns, and it's I do this for you in 9 weeks or 9 months, but that relationship may take 9 years to build. So I think some of the long-term building, infrastructure building, relationship building is not so tied to we're voting on this day outcome. And operating in that way, the kind of long-haul organizing that, you know, the nature of campaigns have to work for the short term, but we need structures that are built a little bit differently.
So moving from like a campaign mindset to like a movement mindset, we're not looking at it.
Okay, so will one person from each group just do a really quick, brief report back? Any volunteers go first? I volunteered my group.
Okay, so, hi, I'm the group's designated yogi. So most of us were from North Carolina and like the Asheville area and like some of the small towns and stuff. So we really try to focus on things that would affect North Carolinians. And so that's why the first one is the Billy Graham Network, because it's a lot of really, really religious network. It has a kind of a heavy influence, especially in the Western North Carolina area, and so they're a highly opposed opposition, and they probably have money, and money gets things done. And so, and then you have to take in consideration the generational gap in understanding transgender issues, because a lot of older people may be less experienced with it or less willing to understand as someone who's like a youth or college age student, or like even like 30s. So typically young people are more open to understanding about those kind of things and willing to listen and have more experience. Then you have to consider like the demographic makeup of your area. Do you have more older adults? Like in Boone, do you have 5 times as many college students as you do locals? So that's a really good thing to consider. And like, what's the age, the race, the gender, and things like that. And even things like how many conservatives versus how many liberals are in your town. And then here's a really big one. You need to elect progressive local leaders. So if you have a lot of like conservative people, and we just had a primary, and in primaries that means you're gonna have an election soon. That means just vote them out. Get rid of them. Take out the trash. And so that's so I guess that's the start of like what our solutions were. And so another thing would be to work with a lot of the Black churches and more progressive faith leaders. And so I know one progressive congregation that has a really heavy presence in Boone, where I'm from, is the Universal Unitarians, and I'm pretty sure they have a really big presence here in Boone, in Asheville as well. And so, and then just educating the public on like transgender issues and try to reduce the prejudice before you go to the polls. And then coalition building with food, because everybody likes food. We had one person had an idea about having a luncheon and inviting like everyone, if it's like, especially if it's like a small town, and like to have like a little open forum where people can discuss while they eat, because everybody's got to eat, and that's how you get people there, because everybody likes food. And things like different nonprofits, trans groups, youth groups, and youth is underlined because a lot of people forget the power that youth have, because many youth are not of voting age yet they can still have a huge political influence. And then Mountain People's Assembly, I've never heard of them, but apparently they're a really big group around here, so they're pretty cool. Okay, so, and then going to public forums at City Hall, that is a huge one, because that can get like the ball rolling on things and like put little bugs in people's ears, and just get as many people as you can to like go to these public forums and like testify at City Hall and like get their side of the story out, and basically, yeah, just have that really progressive leadership there. So, and then like voter registration, and then getting people to even run, because I mean, it's great to vote your conservative legislature out and get some progressive folks in, but if nobody good runs, it's not going to do anyone any good. So you got to get people to actually like run for local public offices and get people to actually vote in these local elections, because like it's a presidential year, everybody's like, yeah, go Bernie, but no one's like, yeah, I'm voting for Chris Ray for U.S. Senate. But and then you have to figure out what your access to funding is, because if you don't have any money, nothing's really gonna happen. And then I thought of a cute bumper sticker proposal. It's a little crude, and so we're probably not gonna really put this on bumper stickers. But I want this on a bumper sticker, and it's because like segregation of toilets. So segregation is shitty.
Will someone from Katie's group volunteer? Thank you.
I'm not quite sure if I volunteered or was volunteered, but so we were talking about laying the groundwork, and I think one of the things that was interesting is some of this was very kind of timely in the campaign, and some of it went back really far and really deep, and it was really good to hear that, because we talked about things like you want to make sure that the ordinance is not the first time that you have reached out to transgender organizations or people of color organizations or reproductive justice organizations. It should not be the first time that y'all are meeting. And hopefully that the support can, is going two ways. We also talked about the fact that if we want transgender folks to be not just seen but leading this, we need to be investing the resources to make sure that we are building transgender leadership in our communities, and that just doesn't happen overnight. And another kind of long-term thing was, we talked about when the marriage campaign was lost in Maine, that they took 2 years of walking door to door, talking to people about why marriage was important. And if we want to plan for an eventual ballot measure that might come, we want to be talking to people years ahead of time about what this is, what this means, why it's important. So we're setting the communication agenda. And then we got closer to talking about building the actual campaign and laying the groundwork for a campaign that's kind of more imminent. We don't always like to talk about it, but money. Where is the money going to come from? What's the budget look like? And are we going to make sure we're resourcing ourselves against some really, really well-funded opposition? Talking to people who've done it before and looking at similar efforts. We want to take a look and see who the decision makers are, and we want to make sure that we have the right people talking to them, people that they're going to listen to. So we talked about conservative politicians oftentimes maybe listening to law enforcement, or their local faith leaders might be the best messenger for them. And then we want to make sure that we're training people to be spokespeople, training people to tell their stories, making sure that we actually have a plan and that we talk about how we're going to actually staff it. And while some of that stuff is not fun, as we were hearing, those are the kind of critical logistic things that can really make or break a campaign. So as you can see, there was lots of ideas here. There was really, really great conversation, and I'm just going to kind of summarize it there. But I encourage people to take a look at what some of the brilliant folks in this team came up with. So.
All right, my group voluntold me that I could read my own handwriting. So we have some things here. Building a volunteer base from the outset. Doing a petition campaign to identify supporters, so start figuring out who your support is in the community. The need to do a Trans 101, because most people really don't understand who transgender people are, and it's really hard to have a conversation without that base knowledge. Checking out support at town hall and doing an assessment of what the votes look like on council. IDing coalition partners and figuring out how to bring that table together really early in the process. That might include business partners, finding fundraisers. We talked about finding model language and making sure that you're not just leaving it to your city attorney to come up with something. There's actually experts who know how to do this. Cultivating your city attorney as an ally can be really important. Let's see, figuring out fundraisers and who's going to be bringing in the money. We covered that one. Figuring out, are there other folks that are already talking about non-discrimination? How do we bring those folks together so there's not multiple people working on this without coordination? Getting some polling to assess support, both public polling and private polling. IDing in-kind support for a campaign. Figuring out what's happening in neighboring communities and how, if there's an ordinance campaign happening 2 towns over, how that could play out in your community, what impact that might have. And then finding faith leadership, developing a communication strategy, and really building out a public ed campaign from the beginning.
No, I can't read that.
My friend volunteered me. First of all, we actually talked about diversity, something that's happening in our local area called, they're having with a